Evening, everyone. How are we? Well, it is first public stream of the new year. It's not that new anymore, though. It's basically a week old. Um, so, in terms of what we discuss first, as there's a couple of things. I was thinking about the teachers who have been balloted to go and vote on strike at the moment. There's a couple of comments here about the New Year's speeches, in particular Keir Starmer's New Year's speech. So we could take a little look at that if people want to discuss it. We could do it, I suppose, from the point of view of two things, because Labour have to do two things at the moment in terms of their offers to the public. They first of all have to persuade them to vote them into office, because it doesn't really matter what your plan is for government. Any number of either Labour or Conservative leaders in the past arguably may have had a plan for government, but if you don't win the election, it never sees the light of day. But once you have won, then are you going to be able to govern? I think there is a reasonable question being asked at the moment, although arguably not a sensible time to ask the question because there can be no answer. And that is, we can can we save the country before the Tories destroy it completely? Well, I don't know. Obviously, it gets more difficult year on year. And when I say destroy the country, I mean you can think of that in several terms. I think of it in literal terms, because if, for example, when I say the UK, I mean the UK of Britain. I mean, not, people will have different views. My view is that the Northern Ireland as part of the UK without the Republic of Ireland doesn't make a great deal of sense. And over the last 100 years, it's never been politically settled. But England, Wales, and Scotland, if that breaks up, however it breaks up, doesn't matter into how many bits, then the UK is literally destroyed. And the more, Scotland is obviously the main issue. In fact, talking about the Keir Starmer speech, I should have had a picture of Keir Starmer instead of Rishi Sunak. He referenced that. He referenced the number of people in Scotland who voted yes in the referendum. What was it now? About 8 years ago, 7.5 years ago, something like that. But yeah, there is this. At the moment, it does seem clear that whether we like the strategy or not, the strategy is working for getting Labour into power. It looks like Labour are going to form a government. There's a number of reasons to think that, you always have to be a little bit, well, I would be a bit cautious, potentially 2 years out. But we have, first of all, Labour are very, 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 very focused on their target voters, to the point where it's quite clear they're adopting positions that doesn't come naturally to the leadership. And that's that focus on those target voters. On the flip side, the Conservatives have been in power. They will have been in power for what? 14 and a half years, depending on when it is. So, people at that time will be sort of more critical of the party in government. The British public will definitely think the Conservatives have had long enough to prove themselves. And if they haven't proved themselves, it is time to think about a change. And, and there is this question, and I have asked the question, and I will continue to ask the question until we can see the results. Do Labour have a plan to get elected? Yes. Do they have a plan to get elected the following election? In other words, do they have a plan to govern in such a way that the people that vote for Labour at the next election cannot possibly think to themselves, yeah, this wasn't a great use of our vote? Because that's the trap. The Tory media are going to be picking on absolutely everything. We know that the economy is going to be constrained by Brexit in all that time. Can Labour do enough to persuade voters that, yeah, this is loads better? This is loads better. That is the question, and we don't know the answer. But in terms of Starmer's speech, what I will say is this. In fact, we had someone said something about impressed with his industrial strategy. I'm going to say this as a Labour supporter. I think there's not a lot of detail with what Labour are promising. That's not to say that they won't have a plan in detail, they're just not announcing it. What I will say is I think sometimes that it will be easier to look at Labour's offer and go, yeah, this is really good, by contrast, because the Conservatives, and I think this is objectively the case, do not have a plan for anything. If you look at Rishi Sunak's speech, the New Year's speech, so he said 5 things, right? He said he was going to halve inflation. Well, I mean, that's going to halve anyway, but let's say it wouldn't. What's his plan for doing it? Did he say how he was going to do it? No, he didn't. He said, I mean, like Rishi Sunak, whenever he talks about government action on inflation, what does he talk about? Pay restraint, keeping public sector pay down. But he did that last year and we ended up with 11% inflation. So that clearly doesn't do the trick. So what's he going to do different this year? He hasn't said. So he doesn't have a plan for it. He says he's going to grow the economy. Okay, how are you going to do that? Oh, you've got no plan for that either. What else did he say? I've now forgotten them. I know there was the boats thing. He's going to bring new laws in. Well, what new laws? Oh, you're not going to say that either? Okay, then. I'm trying to remember what else he said. Oh, bring down NHS waiting time. Not waiting times. He didn't say that. The waiting list, the number of people waiting. What's his plan for that? Oh, he hasn't got a plan for that either. There was a 4th one. I've now forgotten what it was. But anyway, sorry, I'll read some comments now. But yeah, all I would say is I'm looking at what Labour, I think Labour are correctly targeting what the key people in this country think needs fixing, which is what you need to do to win the election. And I think it's quite clear they do know what to do. I think when Labour form government, they're not going to be going around, oh my God, what do we do now? They've got a plan. They've clearly got a plan to get going. They will get going immediately if they have a majority or if they form, an agreement with others. Have they worked out everything? That's what I don't know. Have they worked out a plan to deal with Brexit? Because there is no way of growing the economy back to where it was with Brexit as it is. Have they got a plan for that? I don't know that. But anyway, how are Labour going to renew public services when Starmer says they won't raise taxes or borrows? Where's the money coming from? Well, the thing is, at the moment, yes, they have to say that they're not going to borrow beyond, they have to stick to the Tories' fiscal rules. But here's the thing that a lot of people seem to forget. There is a lot of money that's being generated that is not being taxed. There's been a huge, the amount of money in the country and I don't just mean disproportionately shoved at the top in the way that any vaguely capitalist society will inevitably have. I mean, it's just disappeared up there at a rate of knots. They have the potential for a completely different way of taxing to do that. Also, if you look at the way so there's 2 aspects to it. There's the income and the outgoings, right? So in terms of the income, the tax revenues, there's a lot of taxes that the government are choosing not to take advantage of. But then the spending. The government are also spending a lot of money inefficiently. Now, some of that is going to be money that Labour will have to carry on spending inefficiently because there's no other way to do it. But, like ridiculously generous contracts to people who just donate or mates or stuff like that, that doesn't generally happen. I'm not saying you can't have corruption with Labour, but it doesn't generally happen like that because Labour don't really have many big donors. They might have a few. They don't really have many. So there isn't this conveyor belt of donors getting lucrative public contracts, even if Labour were corrupt enough to want to do that. Another comment here says, Phil, Starmer can't bring in PR in the first term, but he can still improve Labour's future chances by lowering the voting age to 16. Do I agree? He can bring in PR. I've said before, I just worry, I would like them to, but I worry that it's strategically beneficial not to straight away. I do think they'll be, if we see a future where Labour lose power and the Conservatives come back in and Labour haven't introduced PR, then, I mean, that was for me, never mind anything else, that for me was the worst thing Tony Blair did. And if I was to meet him, I would say, you did a lot of good work, right? There were a few things that, you know, best less not mentioned, but there was a lot of good things there, and it's all ruined because you wouldn't introduce PR. You know, that's what I would say to someone like Tony Blair, who will be aghast at the damage the Conservatives have done. I would say if you'd have introduced PR, that wouldn't have been possible, and you know it. And I would say the same thing to Keir Starmer if he makes the same mistake. But there is certainly an argument, a strategic argument for not bringing it straight away. Could he lower the voting age to 16? Yes, he could. Yes, absolutely. And this is what I keep saying to people. Unfortunately, we're playing speculation here. I would, when they publish the manifesto, I mean, I always look through the manifestos anyway with great interest. When Labour publish their manifesto, when the election finally comes, I am going to scour every word, and I am going to critically consider just what it can mean. You know, anything that to me seems at all ambiguous, I'll be looking for it. Because you saw it in the Conservative Party manifesto. Quite a lot of the very illiberal, as it's described, or draconian legislation they have passed a lot of it's sort of in the manifesto. You wouldn't have guessed it. I'll give you one for example. So in the Conservative Party manifesto for 2019, in it they said they were committed to first past the post, right? Of course they are. Now I read that and I thought to myself, well, you know, they mean for Westminster. It's a funny thing to put in, but you know, that's because it's not like Labour were arguing for a different system at the time either, really. But that's what went in the manifesto. Then consider what they did with that manifesto statement. They changed the way the Mayor of London's going to be elected next time to first past the post. So they've basically stacked the odds in favour of a Tory candidate by going with first past the post for the next mayoral election. And they will be able to justify that change by saying, well, we promised it in the manifesto. And that's the sort of thing I'll be looking for in Labour's. Something that you read it and you get an idea of what it means, but you just think to yourself, could it mean something else? And I don't think, and I'm not hoping for Labour to try and pull a fast one, because at the end of the day, if the swing voters, if the people who are voting Labour but don't habitually vote Labour, if they feel that Labour have conned them with semantics, they won't vote for them the next time. So Labour can't do a con job. It's not about conning the voters. It's about slipping a few things past the Tories, the Tory media, the Tory strategists, slipping a few things in. And voting age, and I've gone around the trees on this one, voting age down to 16, I can see being the sort of thing that you could put in the manifesto in a way that's not explicit, just like the Conservatives did with that first past the post. With voting age reduction, I always say young people don't vote. How much less would younger people vote? It is true, young people do not vote in very large numbers, but it is also the case that in a general election, the seats that are targeted, they're called marginal constituencies because the results tends to be fairly marginal. Sometimes, in fact, literally sometimes it can go down to a dead heat, a tie. If one more person had voted for one of the two top candidates, that would have been it. So sometimes they have to draw lots or have a fist fight or something to determine the winner. But generally speaking, there can be, with a very tight contest, there might be a few hundred in it. And although very young people, yes, do not vote in large numbers, if you were to suddenly empower 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, a couple of things could happen. First of all, some of them will vote, and you've basically added an extra pool of voters, and we know they don't generally vote Conservative, let's be honest. The second thing to note is, with 16 and 17-year-olds suddenly getting the vote, that actually might inspire a bit of engagement, because this thing that they weren't able to do before, all of a sudden they can. That actually could be a very powerful bit of PR to persuade more, and not just 16 and 17-year-olds, maybe some 18 and 19-year-olds look at the situation and look at politicians doing something for young people, treating young people as if they have an opinion that's valued. So it might encourage more 18 and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds to vote. That's how I would look at it. I would be fully supportive of an immediate move to allow 16, 17-year-olds to vote like they can in Scotland. Absolutely. The right-wing press have been attacking PR in the papers in advance. Well, of course, but the thing is, unless they can get... They will attack it. It's just like with, anything else that they try and attack over time, like the NHS or, the EU. But it's very difficult for them to get a handle on it or to generate a lot of interest unless there's a specific policy. So yes, every now and then there's an article attacking PR. And the reason for that is because they know that the vast majority of the Labour leadership want it. They know now that the unions want it. So in other words, in terms of the Labour hierarchy, the structure, there's support for it. So the second that Labour think it's of electoral benefit to back it, they'll back it. And that's why I have some hope that we will get it at some point. I just hope that there isn't a strategic blunder made and that they wait too long. That's my fear. But we will see. But anyway, right-wing press has been attacking PR and papers in advance. Peter Hitchens expects Starmer to bring it in, but as an extreme social conservative thinking, Cameron, same as Blair, loves first past the post. Hang on. We don't... right. No one loves first past the post, I don't think. I think, it's just with politicians, they all think that they have the right ideas. Anyone very, very interested in politics thinks that they know what's best. Much more so anyone that's had the ambition to end up leading a party that could credibly form a government. So, and that arrogance, and it is often arrogance, and if it doesn't start out that way, it often turns into arrogance, will tell them that whatever system can give them the power to make the changes that they think are for the best is good. So what happens is with Labour, I mean, the Conservatives will always be in favour of first past the post, because in any other system it would be much harder for them, because the Reform UK and the Brexit Party crowd have muddied the waters a little bit, but generally speaking they've got the right wing sewn up, and it frees them up to focus on the centre. Yes, it's different now, but it could be argued that in 10 years time the current politics will have faded, we hope anyway, and the Tories go back to having the right wing sewn up. And little comment there, can Brexit ever work? No, of course it can't. But I was a bit crestfallen at the slogan when it came out, but you have to understand it strategically. The slogan works strategically, so but no, it can't. And it's not just me going, it's suboptimal, it will never be as good. You cannot get back the economic growth rate. I mean, look at the situation. As a direct result of Brexit, we are 1 million workers short in this country. And it doesn't matter how much you bang on about, oh, we should have more babies or something like that, because that's all the right wing do. They've said for ages, oh, these foreigners taking our jobs. Right, we've got 1 million vacancies. Where's these people that were unable to get a job because of the foreigners? Where are they? We're 1 million people short. Oh, we need more babies. More babies is the answer. More babies isn't the answer for another 16 years at least, is it? Unless they plan on sending them into the workforce in 5 years old, like Jacob Rees-Mogg's wet dream. I've forgotten what I was talking about now. I'm distracted by the Brexit comment. Oh, here's another Brexit one. When is biometrics being introduced? That's going to throw a real spanner in the works. Yes, it is. The simple answer is I don't know. Maybe it's sometime this year. There have been difficulties. I mean, that's actually saved us. Could you imagine if that had come in on time? So the EU have had technical issues with getting it all set up. As soon, and for those who don't know what this is, so there is going to be for third country nationals wanting to travel into, is it all of the EU? Is it just the Schengen area, which will actually include outside the EU? I think it's Schengen specific. Yes, it's Schengen, isn't it? It's not the whole EU, or not every EU country. It's like Schengen, which actually includes some non-EU countries. If you want to enter Schengen, you're going to need to do a biometric scan. And if you think about it at an airport, people go, well, you do that at an airport anyway, that's not a big deal. It's not the airports where the problem's going to be, it's the seaports. So you imagine going into Dover, all the cars and lorries with freight on there trying to get through. There's 4 roads going actually into the port. 5 roads, 5 lanes. And you need some way, because the standard way would be, okay, they've got your 5 vehicle stop, you need to safely get everyone out of the vehicle to an e-gate to scan themselves in. And if it doesn't, and I've heard, I'm not a traveller, so I've never really experienced these, but people tell me they don't always work first time. But you know, let's say they work. You've still got to get people out safely out of their vehicles to get themselves scanned in. And if they're a lorry driver, they still have to sort out, make sure all the paperwork's in order. But a lot of that should be done anyway. And you know, then get back to their thing. I mean, how many lorries do you think you're going to get through in an hour if they have to do all that? I mean, you know, they need someone needs a very cunning plan here. And I think the government's plan is for the EU to just drop the whole thing, but I don't think they're going to. The only reason it's not been implemented yet is technical issues. To begin with, it was shortage of microchips because of the downturn in China due to the pandemic. Well, downturn everywhere, but obviously specifically China produces most of the microchips. And then there's been some other issues as well. So basically it's been plagued by technical issues. But as soon as it's ready, that is going to be trouble. That is going to be trouble. And I just hope that if it does come in and there isn't a cunning plan, I actually do genuinely hope there is a cunning plan, because I don't want to see that, because that's going to impose massive amounts of suffering that will not be quick to fix, even if the government has to do a very sharp about face. I just hope that if it comes in while the Tories are still in power. I don't want it dragging on and then landing in Labour's lap, because that would just be shit. Fossil saying, I'm 62, I've wanted PR voting all my life. Don't even consider this a democracy. My vote never makes any possible difference except in EU elections and one council election in Banbury. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how long ago I've thought about it, but as soon as I was ever introduced to the concept of proportional representation, it just made more sense. You know, bear in mind, it would have been some time in my 20s, I suspect. Well, it will have been. And by then I already knew enough about politics to understand how, you know, votes just get split all over the place and the Tories profit every time. So I would have been, just reading this comment to make sure. That's probably not too bad. But anyway, I think I missed the comment earlier. Yes, we do this, don't we, Em? One of my videos yesterday where I hinted the Tories might implode was thinking if the Tories are going to implode, they better do it and decrease the surplus amount of nutters in the government. Yeah, well, that would inevitably what happens. Labour at the moment are in a position where they can't afford lunatics on their front bench. Unfortunately, you know, when you get complacent, that's when that sort of thing can happen. It wouldn't have happened with the Conservatives, in all honesty, if they hadn't gotten away with being so complacent. And that's why I say, you know, you do have to. I do worry about the following election. I worry less about the next election. Labour do still have a lot of work to do, but I'm reasonably confident they will now do it. I'm worried about the following election, not just because Labour needs to. It's not enough for Labour to actually make massive improvements in places. People need to see it and believe it. And they need to see it and believe it despite what the Daily Mail tell them. But also the Conservatives are very likely to have to critically consider the quality of the people that they had on their front bench. Because at the moment, the people in the Conservative cabinet are not top draw. There's a small number who would get into an effective Conservative front bench, but it's quite a small number. I'm not going to go through them. Like Michael Gove would possibly be a standout one, but there's so many very, very poor politically as well. Some of them are clever, but they're still poor politicians. Like Rishi Sunak's clever, Suella Braverman's clever, but they're very poor political operators. You know, Suella Braverman, it's less noticeable because she basically is the dog whistler. She's doing the job that Priti Patel did. Suella Braverman's way cleverer than Priti Patel, but she's not any better at politics. But most of the time she doesn't have to do that. She just has to play her role as the evil witch, and then that's fine. Is there any way of making the media speak truth to power rather than gaslighting? That is the question, isn't it? There are, in some countries, their media laws are very good, and it would be a case of looking at that. I don't really know what the answer is. The age-old problem will be any moves to introduce tighter regulation of the media, and there will be. Starmer will be introducing the full Leveson. In fact, he said as much recommendations. Arguably, it could be a case that what you do is bring them in and then have a further review to make sure that they're fit. But there will be, under Starmer, tighter regulation of the media. Is it good enough? Probably not. The problem is, as soon as you introduce something like that, the media will claim about intrusion on the free press. And this is the difficulty, isn't it? You need a free press. The idea of a free press is free to speak truth to power. So in other words, the government can't, the government can't gag them. But what happens when the media is actually little better than a propaganda machine paid for and speaking for a small number of billionaires? And it's like, you know, it's a proper Who Watches the Watchmen type scenario. And I don't know what the answer is. I do know that there are answers because other countries have done it. But it would be a case of you go and look at those other countries. And not everything is always transferable. Like, we've got a particularly dangerous situation in this country. We don't just have some journalists who go rogue and, you know, for clicks will just say some things that are not necessarily untrue but a bit misleading. You've got a very sophisticated network of newspaper and media outlets in this country that are all from the same small number of billionaires. They're all being funded by the same small number of billionaires, but lots of different outlets to appeal to lots of different types of people. But anyway, Labour's leading the polls already reduced as Labour are not popular, not being Tories, not election winner. If you mean Labour's leading the polls in the last week has reduced, it has, but bear in mind what's happened in the last week. The government get their messages out. Parliament's not in session. And this is always the danger, and it's the big danger I always said with Labour not having their own social media strategy. When Parliament's in session, there's a lot of news about what's going on, and therefore Labour have an opportunity to get their message across. When that's not the case, now Labour can still generate some news, they can do visits, they can make speeches, but here's the thing. If you've got some major news going on, for example, like strike action, then what are you going to put on your front page? Or you know, in fact, if you look at the front page at the moment, it's mostly about, you know, Harry and Meghan and the royal family. And again, classic, absolutely classic of our media. It's not news. It's not news. Shouldn't be on the front pages. A little mention on page 23 or something if you must. That shouldn't be on the front pages. It's on the front pages because we do not have a media that speaks truth to power. We have one that distracts the population from what those in power are doing. And if Labour are in power, you wouldn't see front pages for days on end about a bust up in the royal family. You would say, oh, you won't believe what Keir Starmer's done this time the Labour Prime Minister, he's done this thing, it's going to screw you all over. Excuse me. Oh God, I've missed some comments, haven't I? If the Tory party collapsed, who would become the official opposition party? Lib Dems, SNP or Plaid? Well, right. If the Tory party literally collapsed, in other words, none of their candidates won a seat, I am going to say that would not be good for democracy. It wouldn't even be good for Labour, ironically, because Labour would win like so many seats. I don't know. Would the Liberal Democrats win more than the SNP? Possibly. It is possible. If literally the Conservative vote collapsed, you would expect the Liberal Democrats to be, but Labour would win all. Labour would be as well represented proportionally in Westminster as the SNP are in terms of the Scottish Westminster seats. It would be that bad, or nearly that bad. That's not a good situation, because it won't be good for anyone. Like, it wouldn't be good for the country because one party would just have a ridiculous amount of power, but it wouldn't be good for Labour either because the rebellions would be massive. It wouldn't be possible to effectively whip that many MPs, particularly in a party where they tend to be quite recalcitrant anyway. So yeah. Someone's saying that I was the Labour candidate for Adderbury, Bloxham and Bodycote ward for the Cherrell District Council. These are like names I've never heard of. How did you vote for our parcels? Oh, someone ran to someone else. That's not a question for me. I think you'll say Starmer seems chaotic good in D&D terminology. I'm not sure. I'm not sure he's comfortable being chaotic. But anyway. Oh, trying to pick through comments because there's a little side discussion going on as well. Why won't Labour commit to PR over everything else? Right. So there's two. If we're thinking strategically, because I don't know what the individual policymakers in Labour think about PR, in all honesty. Like, some people will think, well, everyone else is behind it, so the Labour leadership must not like PR. Doesn't necessarily mean that at all. There are two strategic reasons. The first is, even if Labour were going to announce it for the manifesto, you wouldn't announce it now, because, as was mentioned earlier, the right-wing papers are already attacking PR, but they can't really get a handle on it because no one's, like, most people reading it aren't that bothered because no one's threatening it. All of a sudden, if it became, like, if Labour were to announce it now, with Labour in a position where it looks like they're going to form the next government, then all of a sudden people will be thinking, oh, this will be the last election under first past the post unless something spectacular happens, at which point the right wing would leave Harry alone. Harry and Meghan, it's like, right, you stay in America, we're busy now. And the front pages would then take over, attacking PR, attacking everything to do with it, coming up with examples of countries, like where something's gone wrong, it costs this much extra money, or oh, it's not fair, and all the rest of it. They would go mad. And the problem is that would create a distraction. At the moment, Labour wants to talk about the economy, and that's it. If you think about key policy areas, Labour want to talk about the economy. They don't want to talk about Brexit. They don't even want to talk about the NHS or education or any of those things. They're side issues. They want to talk about the economy, because people's views about all of the policy areas are variable. Whereas Labour don't. So wherever Labour take a stance on any other policy area, amongst those swing voters, there will be some that don't agree with it. So they want the election to be about the economy because everyone agrees the economy is buggered. And it's really that simple. So if Labour did this, they would be introducing, and they'd be introducing it. There's no way of avoiding it. It would come up in it. Every time Starmer tried to do an interview, they would just talk about this, and he would never be able to get his messages across. So if you're going to do it, you do it as late as possible. Then in terms of, so does that mean that they're just keeping it in their back pocket, but they will announce it for the next election? No, because well, they might do, I hope they do. But strategically, I would probably say not. And the reason for that is, so imagine they win the next election. And yes, if they promise to introduce proportional representation and they've got a plan ready to go, it's none of this, we'll have a review. It's like, no, this is what we're going to do. They will get a load of Lib Dem and Green voters voting for them in their target seats, right? They'll be able to marshal, I don't know how many extra votes, but any significant number of extra votes, which will come their way. They'll probably get across the country 1.5 million, 2 million maybe. That, if they can marshal that, if they can concentrate that in their target seats, that'll throw them over the line, no problem. So then what will happen is they'll have one parliament where they've got the majority they need to introduce the legislation they want to introduce. But at the and they'll have to use some parliamentary time to get PR through, by the way, and it won't be easy. It will actually take quite a lot of parliamentary time because it will be such a massive change to the constitution. Expect argy-bargy. Even if it's in the manifesto, expect argy-bargy. So then you introduce proportional representation. So you use a certain amount of parliamentary time that you wanted to use for other things. You get to the election, proportional representation is in place. Yes, the Labour leader will still be the Prime Minister after it, but it'll be in coalition because Labour are not going to win more than 50%. And even if they did, let's say they absolutely blew it out the park and they got like 51% of the vote or something. That's a tiny minority. That's like hardly anything. The Labour rebels wipe that out, no problem. So he still needs to, you know, Stan would still need to form a coalition. So the argument would go, if it was me, if I'm thinking about strategically, the argument would go, you don't introduce it at the next election if you think you're going to win anyway. If you're confident you're going to win anyway, and you're going to win a majority, you don't introduce it then. So then you give yourself 4 years to start introducing your legislation. Then you promise it. You promise it in the one after. Get your Lib Dem and Green voters on board who will vote for you just this one so that they can vote and have a meaningful vote in future elections. And it only needs to be in your target seats, which is fine because those are the seats where their vote currently means naff all. Then you have another term. So you'll get a second term where you have a majority. Consolidate the legislation you brought in the first parliament. Make sure you see your projects through. Then for the third term, form your coalition. And at which point it should be the case that although your coalition partners may not have agreed with what you put in place at the time, they won't dismantle it either. But anyway, Labour don't want to talk about politics. Well, who does? Well, I do. But, you know, no, politicians never want to talk about politics, really, if they want to be elected, because what they want to talk about are the issues that people feel, and the issues that people feel are the important ones aren't necessarily always the important ones. But that's what they need to do. They need to say, look, you hear it all the time, don't you, with politicians? They accuse other politicians of playing politics, and you look at it and you go, yeah, they're politicians. But the reason is that ordinary people don't like it. They want politicians who like cut through politics as if there's such a thing. So they're always using language like that. Anyway, I would agree that Labour would get extra votes if they offer PR, even if Tory voters hate it and there's a big campaign in right-wing papers against. They would. But like I said, at the moment, it would be very distracting. Whenever they decide to introduce it, and I do hope they decide to introduce it, and just for my own heart, I would like them to introduce it early, even though I can see the strategic benefit in waiting. I would just like them to get it out of the way and get it done. Get it done with. Apart from anything else, I'll tell you another thing. Another reason why, see, the reasons I've gone through just now about proportional representation or my thinking about it is what would have been the case if you'd asked me 10 years ago. But there's a new dynamic now with Brexit, and it's this. The reason why Labour are having to take such a weird Brexit position, and he reiterated it in his speech, is because they're targeting voters who do not want Brexit reversing just yet. They're not ready for that. Now, we can't have that forever. We can't even have it for all that long. It's ridiculous. It's doing such damage to the economy and society. If they introduce proportional representation, the voters they have to target at the moment change. In fact, if they introduce proportional representation, then Labour can pursue a more honest Brexit philosophy, which still won't be quick reversal, remember, because the EU won't allow it. You know, we've got to prove ourselves as like committed members again. That's going to take a while, but we could move a lot more quickly to there if we were a lot more honest about it. And Labour could afford then to be more honest about Brexit. I'm not saying politics would suddenly be honest, but they could be a lot more honest about Brexit if they weren't having to chase a small number of, like, as it turns out, 50-year-old uneducated middle managers, which is basically what they seem to be chasing. But anyway. Any move towards Europe, they'll insist on PR being in place, but I hear what they say. I mean, well, that may be a comment to someone else. I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of rejoining the EU, which is a long way off, we don't know what would happen. There are some terms that you're supposed to sign up to, but we also know that it's a matter of negotiation. And I don't want to like fall into the trap of thinking because we're such a large country and a big economy that we'd be able to win this concession and that concession. I don't know. What I do know is that we are a large enough economy and a large enough consumer base to be able to get concessions. I just don't know which ones are credible. I think there's a very good chance we could still retain the pound. I don't know. What reason would the EU have for renegotiation of a Brexit agreement they already have full access? Because it has to be renegotiated. It has to be. The Brexit negotiate. If you talk about the trade and cooperation, obviously the withdrawal agreement's done, that's it. And Labour have not suggested that they want that rewriting anyway. The one that Labour are talking about improving is the trade and cooperation agreement. The trade and cooperation agreement, when it was agreed, had like a 5-year shelf life on it. So in 2025, they have to start negotiating it again, because in 2026, a load of it just disappears into thin air otherwise. So there is and that, think about that as well. The EU, for that to be in there, the EU wanted it. Think about, why did the EU want the trade and cooperation agreement to be basically have to be renegotiated again 5 years later? Because they knew there'd be another election and hopefully another government. Or at least, if it was the same party in government, that they may have seen the reality of Brexit and be a bit more realistic. You know, so that's why it's not that the trade and cooperation agreement is like our other trade agreements where, you know, you go to the other country and say, sorry, we seem to have given you a bit too much here, can we renegotiate it? No, it has to be, regardless of whether both sides, even if both sides were delighted with the terms and wanted to keep them as they are, that's fine, but they'd still have to negotiate them. That is part of the agreement. That is done. 2026 EU renegotiates. Yeah, but you have to have a run up to them. Technically, it's 2026 when the thing comes, sort of needs changing over, but you have to have a lead up to it. So we'll start negotiating again in 2025, which will hopefully then be Labour negotiators. What I say makes sense practically or strategically, but the bigger problem is structural. Hang on, I might have to wait for him to be able to post again. There's a 60-second delay. I'm just waiting for David to clarify that one. Agree with it, Phil, on PR. This is why I think parliamentary time max needs to be overriding imperative. I mean, at the end of the day, it will be a matter of politics. If we get PR, it will ultimately be a matter of politics. It needs to be that the party that can deliver it needs to see it in their own interests, their political interests. It's just that I think it is. I think it is in their interests. Well, I'm sure it is. I keep saying, you look at, you look back and you think about the good that the last Labour government did do, and you think, and you can think of it if you want. You can think of the bad things it did, and you look at it now and you think, okay, we can still see the effects of the bad things it did. We don't really seem to see the effects of the good things, do we? So if and that's how I would appeal to anyone in the senior Labour leadership. If you want to look, when you leave politics, if you want to look back in your retirement and say, oh, I did that, that was quite good, you won't be able to if you let the Tories come back in and crash it all again. So you can't stop the Tories coming back to power. You can't stop that. But with and I mean proportional representation, I don't mean this hybrid Frankenstein monstrosity that the Senate and Holyrood have. I mean proper PR for Westminster seats. If you introduce that, you massively restrict access from extremists. Now, and that's where you'll also get some internal opposition from Labour, because this system that will freeze out the far right will also freeze out the far left. But I mean, you have to compromise anyway. I mean, the far left don't get into power anyway. I don't know why they can't see it. The far right only succeed because they've got massive amounts of money and organisation behind them, and they own the media. But anyway, ultimately the EU will do whatever it's in own best interest. Yeah, all governments do whatever is in their own best interest, apart from ours, which actually decided to impose sanctions on itself. We actually seem to have now. Other governments in advanced economies can make mistakes. Some of them can even be downright stupid, like Donald Trump's government, and shoot themselves in the foot. But they at least are trying to act in their national interest, even if they prioritise selfish interests or ideology above it. They are at least trying to act in their own national interest. The Conservative government right now, never mind past Conservative governments, the Conservative government right now are deliberately acting against the national interest, and they knowingly are doing that. Some of them are knowingly doing it because they just don't know how to wrest power back from the nutters, and some of them are doing it because they are the nutters, and as far as they're concerned, it's just feathering their own nest. They are disaster. We have disaster capitalists in charge of the government who see the nation as a commodity to be like a company to be broken up and sold off. That's how they see it. Starmer could hold a referendum on PR without being a manifesto. He could. Yes, that is the other way to do it. Would you want that? I wouldn't want that. Yeah. The problem then is you make it about that one issue. It's actually better to create a scenario where it's part of an offer rather than the offer in itself. I think if Labour introduced PR late enough to stop it being a massive distraction, but it can't. I mean, I used to joke, well, I still would joke that they should wait until the manifesto has been off to the printers and only then do it. In reality, you do need a few months run up. So when you think the election is coming, and be bloody sure, I mean, maybe it's the sort of thing that could be announced next year. Maybe it could be announced next spring. Or maybe in next New Year's message. I mean, I don't think it will be. I'm just pie in the sky here. But it's, yeah, it's, I don't know. You just leave it as late as possible. But when you do that, if you've built up enough of a lead in the polls and you've tested out your target voters and they're fine with PR, at least they're not, as long as you're confident they'll still vote for you. Because remember, bear in mind, in 2019, a lot of people voted Conservative that were against Brexit. There were Tories against Brexit. There were swing voters against Brexit, but they still voted Conservative because of the overall package. And what was that overall package? For some of them, it was just getting Brexit done. For some of them, they just thought, oh, anything but Corbyn. For some of them, it was just because the Conservatives will always be the lesser of two evils for them. Whatever it happened to be, they didn't want Brexit, but they still voted Conservative. So Labour want the same situation with PR. They want that. They want people, they want to be in a position where they can offer it and people will still vote for them even if they're not sure about it. Just like with Brexit. Would I make a video sometime explain the different types of PR and their differing pluses and minuses? Yeah, I would only do it if it suddenly became more relevant. At the moment, I do have my own preferences, which is a fairly standard system. I know there's no such thing because everyone's got a slightly different version. It's the sort of thing that's, here's the thing, like there are times when I always say there's like 3 types of video effectively I produce. And I always say to anyone who wants to try and build up an audience on social media, you have to focus on 90% of the time on engagement. You know, if you're deciding different bits of content, which is the one that's going to get you the most views, that's the one you do. Doesn't matter which is more important or whatever, which is going to get you the most views. And then 10% of the time, maybe 1 out of every 10, that's when you do the video on the thing that you think is really important to get out there. If you focus all the time on the stuff that you just think is the most important, if other people don't agree, you won't get the views. So you might do that sort of content. You might get a niche following and maybe you get about 2,000 views a video or something like that. Always doing that content. 2,000 views, no problem. Or you do something really engaging, get 50,000 views a video, and then every now and then you throw your message out. Doesn't get as many because isn't, you know, some people aren't bothered, but maybe then it gets 30,000 views, which is way more than your 2,000 views. So in terms of my videos, they're the majority of them, the ones that I would say for engagement. They're all, I don't do them purely for that. You know, they're all videos that I decided to put time in and, you know, I think are worth doing. But if the 14 videos I do a week, I must have 30 topic ideas and like half of them are just dismissed. Sometimes I write one and then just don't do it. So there's the types of videos that are there for engagement. There's the types of videos that I think are there for engagement that just don't do very well because I got it wrong. And then there are message ones. And the PR one is a classic message one. If I put out a video on the different types of PR, it would get very few views compared to my normal. And so that's fine if it's a really important message to get out there. But given that it's not a part of the public debate, is it important? I would say not. I would say not. Not at this time. If Labour started hinting at it, then yes. If they actually announced it, then yes. But until then, I don't think so. I will still keep talking about it in general terms as the benefits, but not different types, because until it's a realistic proposal, it doesn't matter what type we have. If you have power through election, why do a referendum? Well, the thing about the party who wins power is considered to have a mandate based on their manifesto. I know it's a load of rubbish. Apart from anything else, the first past the post, you don't need even half the voters to vote for you to win that power. But the way our constitution works is it's assumed that if someone can form a majority in Parliament, that their manifesto is their mandate. So anything they want to do that's not in the manifesto, they don't have a mandate for. So what they need to do is to get a parliamentary majority for. Now, if Parliament as a whole isn't all that keen on it, you know, and the Lords could easily dismiss it as well if they don't think it's in the national interest. So then that's when you sort of need a referendum. Like, for example, David Cameron didn't dare promise to leave the EU in his manifesto in 2015 just to have a referendum. And he didn't think he'd lose that many votes, I suppose, because it was considered that he would win that referendum. I mean, at the time he'd won several referenda, so he's probably a bit arrogant about the whole thing. A referendum on PR could easily be lost. The AV vote started with a huge majority in favour, ended deeply reversed after massive campaigning. AV was only likely to change 20 odd results. Yeah, the AV thing was a load of rubbish. The problem with the AV referendum as well, though, it was a different kettle of fish. There were several problems with that campaign, but the key point is, as you rightly note, that people were sort of in favour of a different electoral system. They were up for it, but then poisoned against it come the day of the poll. And the reason for that is, of course, the right-wing media campaigned heavily against it. But other things that went wrong with it, the Liberal Democrats were not effective, and Labour were not backing it because they were still like falling apart themselves. They were panicking all over the place. You know, they were still soul searching after they'd lost in 2010. So yeah, it was that was the worst PR campaign from the side offering like a positive improvement. The PR referendum, if we were to have one, I would expect to be better run, but I would still say, if you want to introduce a new system, you have to do it in one of those two ways. You either have to win an election with it in your manifesto, or you have to offer a referendum. It's got to be one of those two things. It will never pass through Parliament without one of those two things. So, because you have to have your mandate. And which of those is more likely to deliver a positive result for PR? I would say in your manifesto. I would say in your manifesto. And yeah, the Tories won't support it. I can understand some Conservative at the moment looking at what extremism has done to their party and thinking there are Conservatives who would prefer proportional representation, but as a group, as a party, they won't ever get behind it. They will never get behind it. Anyway, all said and done, as British are adverse to change. Well, I don't know. We voted for Brexit. We voted for Brexit, and that was a big, and even people thought it would be a big old check. Admittedly, there were some people thinking, oh, it won't make much difference either way, so we might as well vote for it just in case we get these good things. But those were idiots. I think most people realised it was going to be fairly seismic. Did I get the literary reference in a comment about the Tories earlier, by the way? Yes, I did. It was Charles Dickens. Opinion on Welsh independence? What, my opinion? They're the same as my opinion on any independence. I don't think it's sense. I am in favour of union in all contexts. People are stronger together. But anyway, am I worried Starmer could lose due to new boundary changes if he doesn't sustain the lead? Also, what do I make of Starmer's New Year speech? So, okay, last couple of things then. In terms of the boundary changes, no. Because although, yes, they are set up to favour the Tories, Labour have also known about them, and we know what those boundaries are, and they will be, like at the moment, whenever you look at sort of electoral calculus and you look at predictions, oh, if there were a general election, this would be the result. Actually, I think there is one of them that uses the new boundaries now, but Labour will definitely be using the new boundaries in terms of their strategy. They're not stupid. They're clearly getting a lot of things right. They absolutely know what their target seats are, and it's not seats that exist at the moment, it's the ones that will exist at the next election. So no, I don't. If it was going to be a super tight election like in 2019, then I would be worried. And I know you might think to yourself, Phil, the Tories got a massive majority. It wasn't super tight. It was because they won a lot of seats by a very small number. But I am looking at the next election and thinking the Conservatives are going to get mullered. And that doesn't necessarily mean Labour will get a large majority, because the swing, like if Labour were to get a 1997 style swing, that would still not give them much of a majority, and that was a massive swing. So the Tories can afford to lose crap loads and Labour still be fairly weak in government, but it is entirely possible that the Tories will lose so many that Labour actually do get a good majority. In terms of the other one, what did I make of Starmer's New Year's speech? Well, there was two sides to it. There's the physical delivery, which wasn't his fault, but there were, if anyone actually listened to it, there were a few technical problems, weren't there? Which won't have helped. It was a bit like, it reminded me of Theresa May's conference speech where she started coughing and then the set fell down. It was a bit of that. It wasn't her fault, just like it wasn't Starmer's fault, but the mic basically failed. But in terms of the content of it, I'll tell you what I particularly liked about it. The overriding theme of it, and I know it's cringy in that he's used the phrase and he's taken ownership of the phrase "take back control," which was the Brexit phrase, and he alluded to that as well. But he used it to, like with Brexit, take back control. What did it ever mean? Take back control. What did it mean? It wasn't explained, was it? Oh, we make our own laws. What? Who? Me? Can I make my own laws? No, I can't, can I? Who makes our own laws? Well, our parliament. Yeah, they've been doing that for hundreds of years, mate. There was no specific take back control plan, whereas Starmer has actually detailed what it means, and there's bad parts to it as well. You know, there's definitely. I'm not saying it's all good. You know, there can be genuine criticisms of it, but he's been specific that what it means is removing power from central government and spreading it around the country. That is a theme that keeps coming up. That is clearly what he intends to do in government. So when I go back to the start of the video, or the start of the stream, sorry, when I was talking about, you know, Labour clearly have a plan for getting elected, but do they have a plan for government so they get elected again? That's the question. But if I was to just say, do they have a plan for government? Clearly, absolutely clearly, he keeps going on about this. You know, that paper of Gordon Brown's, I don't know how much of it Starmer will commit to for the first Parliament, but it's quite clear that that is going to be a central plank of what he wants to do in government, to actually remove power to give power away. And that's another thing that lets me think that actually proportional representation is credible, because any Prime Minister that wants to devolve power to the extent that Starmer is talking about is not someone who wants to be around in politics and thinks that they know what is best at all times. I know that Labour under Blair introduced devolution as well, to an extent, and wanted to introduce more than they were able to, and didn't introduce PR. So there is always that side of it as well. But it just occurs to me that if someone in power actually wants to diminish their power, they're sort of acting in the national interest. And they may get things wrong. There may be things that have unintended consequences, but they are at least not megalomaniacal. Why have I chosen such a tricky word? Megalomaniacal. Idiot. Why did I do that? But anyway. Do I think that Gordon Brown will ever play a serious role in government again? In government, no. How can he? But as a policy maker, of course, he is at the moment. I don't see why that wouldn't continue with Labour in government. So, yeah, in terms of a senior policy advisor, I absolutely can see Gordon Brown carrying on. Gordon Brown's not 84. He's getting on a bit. What is this? Have I missed something again? Just going through the last few comments just to make sure I haven't missed anything I can just answer really quickly. Brown offered a very strange offer in RE, the laws that nobody asked for. I don't know. I think at the moment people are more concerned about Westminster, but I think people have been concerned about the House of Lords for quite a while now. And again, think about what Starmer has said for his justification. And, you know, you have to take what politicians say with a pinch of salt in terms of their justification for things. But I think this one rings true. Starmer has said in order to bring trust back to politics. And, you know, that's a theme he keeps coming back to. And I do think it rings true with other things he's said and announced as policies. you know, the idea of being able to buy yourself a seat in Parliament, you know, or you know, do favours for the government and get a seat in Parliament, and although it's not the most powerful chamber, that you can buy a parliamentary seat or do favours for a parliamentary seat, how can that not erode trust in politics? So that has to stop. And people keep saying, well, you can do that by just stopping politicians from making appointments or members of the government and things like that. It's like, yeah, you can. And then what happens with... So Labour could do that and they could say, look, no politician is going to decide who enters the House of Lords. It's all going to be this totally independent committee of various people outside of politics. But first of all, how inscrutable is that system? Second of all, Conservatives come back to power, they can just change it back. Like, no government can put something in place in terms of domestic arrangements, shall we say, that the next government can't change overnight. I'll have to say domestic arrangements because obviously the next government cannot reverse Brexit overnight, even if it wanted to, even if its voters wanted it to. But anyway. But there we go. Right, so I think we've come to the end there. Thanks very much for coming, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll be back on again next week, I expect. And until next time, I'll see you later.